In the world of SaaS computing, one of the biggest challenges is keeping your cloud costs under control. That's why CloudZero created their platform, the number one cloud cost intelligence platform on the web. And today we have the privilege of talking to Bill Buckley. He is the Senior Vice President of Engineering there at CloudZero, so he knows what he's talking about. Bill, thanks so much for talking with us today.
Thanks for having me, Lance. I'm excited to dive into this.
So you said that you have had a very, very busy day today, talking with all sorts of people. What are some of the topics you guys are talking about just through the day?
Yeah, as you imagine, everyone right now wants to make sure that they are not wasting money on the public cloud. In tech, money's no longer cheap. You can argue maybe it never should have been, but today especially, everyone's really worried about efficiencies. Everyone's business is feeling different pressures. I think we're all going through that, and everyone has this sinking pit in their stomach that they have to make sure they're being really efficient. And so they want to reach out to us to make sure that they are getting those outcomes.
So I'm going to step back just a hair because I want you to kind of explain when we're talking about cloud computing costs. Give me an idea of what's driving this kind of cost that people are dealing with.
Yes, so our customers are generally digitally native and SaaS companies. We work with the best SaaS companies in the world to help them with their public cloud spending. We generally focus first on whatever is material to their cost of goods sold. So think almost everything that they're building is consuming some kind of public cloud resource. That could be from one of the hyperscalers, but it could also be from a third-party best-of-breed observability tool or CDN. And at the end of the day, that's almost always their second largest cost at a company after people. And so it's really material to the whole business to make sure that they're investing that money in those tools and that infrastructure correctly and smartly.
That's really interesting. So help me understand, before CloudZero figured out, hey, we really need to solve this, give people some insight into their costs and figure out what to do about it. What was the typical path for most SaaS companies? How would they even evaluate or be aware of what their costs were for computing?
There were generally two paths. There were a number of interesting tools out there in the first generation of cloud cost management. They often focused on helping the finance teams, maybe one person engineering org, understand what the bill was and doing invoice reconciliation, and maybe even understanding, could you commit to a certain amount next year to your cloud vendor to get a better price? So that was option one. Option two was to go build a system yourself. To say, hey, we have these big questions. We have a whole bunch of smart engineers. Let's go build something. But very quickly, they found that was a hard problem, and that all of a sudden they had, a dozen engineers building something that wasn't central to their value. And so in both those cases, they never quite got to that answer of why are our costs what they are, and what should we be doing to make smarter decisions.
So I've enjoyed that you keep saying they, but we know in this conversation that you guys have actually used your own tool to diagnose some of your own stuff. So tell me just a little bit about that. Like, how are you using your own product to solve your own issues?
Yes, so one of the things we believe deeply is that we should be customer zero. We started using this platform before we even sold it to any customers, and even today, pretty much any feature we use first, and we use it daily, weekly, all of those things. And so a few ways that we use it. The first, and the one that my peers as other engineering leaders are always the most keen to hear, is we use it for unit cost visibility. So we can look at our bill and not understand just that we spent X dollars on this platform last month, but we can now add a denominator to that. We spent X, but we spent X because we serviced this many customers, or we delivered this much units of value that we sell for. So all of a sudden, instead of having a conversation of why did our cloud costs go up by 10% last month, we instead are having a conversation for, hey, are we efficiently providing value to that? And so that's honestly my favorite thing about the platform. I look almost every day at one of our unit cost dashboards to understand, no matter what our bill is on the cloud, are we doing that in an efficient way that drives the business? The second way we really love is we're a small team still. We're a small, hungry team that has a lot to do. So we love using our platform as almost insurance. We have this anomaly subsystem that's really amazing. It doesn't take deep configuration or watching, but it's always there, and it's sending our engineers information when they may have made a mistake. Whenever you're a fast-moving SaaS company, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to be changing production multiple dozens, maybe hundreds of times a day. Some amount of those changes are going to have unintended cost impacts. Our anomaly subsystem allows us to tell engineers, hey, something you checked in the last few days might be costing a little extra money. Outside of that, though, we also even use it to track how we can save money. Even being a very, we hope, pretty mature cost company, there's always areas where we're still finding opportunities to save money, new projects to save money. New projects even change our architecture to save money. And we use our platform to identify those, to know which ones we should go after, and then track their progress and how much we actually save on them to keep ourselves honest.
That's really interesting. So let's go back to, you mentioned the idea of telling your engineers, you said anomaly subsystem, so that I'm interested in that. Tell me a little bit about the anomaly subsystem, and then how does that information help an engineer perform better or more efficiently in the future?
Absolutely. So there's this central problem when it comes to cost in the cloud world. We have equipped engineers with lots and lots of tools to give them instrumentation on how their code is running from a performance point of view, from a stability point of view, from a quality point of view, from a security point of view, but not a cost point of view. If an engineer checks something in right now, they're probably going to have alarms, maybe the dreaded pager duty to tell them that all of a sudden some customers are getting errors or that they had to scale a resource or something else. What most engineers don't have, though, is a great feedback loop for how much that last code change actually costs the company. And so that's what our anomaly subsystem delivers. It gives both general notifications on where costs are going, but more importantly, just like you get that pager duty or other alert when all of a sudden your users are getting errors, we can send you an alert when all of a sudden something's costing too much, unexpected cost rise. That's what we call an anomaly. That allows your engineers to move really quickly, but still have that backstop so that if they change something, they don't have to wait 6 months or 6 weeks for their CTO or their head of finance to come to them and go, hey, why did you spend an extra $500,000 in the cloud for that one line of code you might have missed?
Got it. So let's see if we can get into, like, obviously no real names here, but tell me about a time that CloudZero, like one of these bells went off, one of these alarms went off on some code you guys committed. Walk me through that process. Like, how does that work internally for you guys?
Absolutely. So the first thing we do is we believe that your infrastructure cost is not useful until you understand what's driving that cost. So first we map out our infrastructure to understand who owns it. And so when we see a cost increase, the platform can inform that team. So quite recently, probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we had a team get an anomaly from our system. It said all of a sudden that a specific customer was costing a lot more than it would normally expect to be costing on a Wednesday afternoon. The team jumped in there and took a look, and it turned out that another team had upscaled some infrastructure. And it turned out there were 2 features running on that infrastructure. There was one team who was starting to hit issues because whatever they were doing were hitting up the limit. And this was something that would only run every now and again. And another team that got the anomaly, they actually changed nothing. But all of a sudden, because they were sharing stuff, every time that this new second team ran, it was costing them twice as much, even though they didn't need that. So this is the kind of thing where even outside of a code change, all of a sudden a decision they had made architecturally 12 months ago was impacting them and would have cost a lot more to deliver a very specific customer value on that. And so luckily it was an easy fix. They decided to create their own infrastructure there so it wasn't shared, because this was a piece of infrastructure that was very much on demand. So there was no reason to share it. It was really just an expediency thing when they were trying to get to market quickly. And they got that specific customer back to a much better run rate.
That's really cool. So if you guys hadn't been using your own platform, I'm just surmising here. So what would happen is that thing would have triggered an extra cost. And the only way that you would have seen that would be in an invoice for a future month when you get your bill for all of your cloud computing, and you're suddenly going, what happened? You basically are trying to do forensics in the dark, completely in the dark, if you're not using CloudZero's own platform for that. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And you're doing forensics weeks later. So absolutely, if you're lucky, the second week of the following month, you'll get an invoice. And if it was a big enough impact, you'll notice it. But honestly, unless you're doing a cost-cutting project, most people's bills are going up a few percent. So are you going to notice that it went up, 2.2 instead of 1.8%? Maybe if you're really focused on it. So best case, you notice it, 4 to 6 weeks later. But then you have to decide, out of all the hundreds of things your team did, which of those small changes impacted that. And you would have been, as you said, doing a forensic in the dark many weeks later, versus delivering directly to the team that owns that code and that infrastructure. By the way, your cost seems to be going up here in the last 24 hours.
So something occurred to me, you already said it, but it's just starting to like register with me here. So essentially in the world of cloud computing, everybody's sort of increasing month to month. You hope your business is growing, you're servicing more people, probably adding more features. And so the reason it's so critical that you guys can put a cost per unit on this and highlight these small anomalies is because you're going to always just feel like, yeah, cost just should be going up. And you never have a sense of like, this is what our actual expenditure is for what we're delivering. So this is an eye opener for me. How has you guys having like this visibility into your own business? Because again, we know you guys deliver for customers all around the globe. We're specifically talking about what you guys are doing with your own product at CloudZero. And I realize this is kind of a basic premise of your platform. How has viewing something with it, like you said, a denominator, a per unit cost, changed how you guys think or even evaluate your costs in what you're delivering?
Honestly, it saves me a bunch of time. We've been incredibly fortunate over the last few years to have a business that is scaling at a really healthy rate. And so, as you and I have both said, that means pretty much every month our cloud cost is larger than the month before. But that doesn't mean every month we have teams that need to dive in and figure out how to explain that or how to fix that. Now, it does mean that happens sometimes. We're not perfect. We all make mistakes, and there are times when, our costs have gone out of control or been out of there, but it allows us to have a discussion that is really connected to the business. Because now we can say, hey, we understand that here is our sales plan, here is our margin target, here is our burn multiple, whatever metrics at the business level you use, we can now connect directly there. And whenever you can connect your engineering activities to those business metrics, it makes it a lot easier to have those strategic conversations and decide where to spend your time. Because if one thing is definitely true that I know from my career is engineering always has more to do than it can actually do. So we never want another project. So if there's a month where our cloud costs jump 10% and we can prove that that is healthy and coming from new revenue generating usage, then I'm really happy to go on to our next piece of innovation versus spending, a week of my time or a bunch of people on my team's time to understand that.
So you brought up innovation. So this is kind of a third leg of really what CloudZero promises to deliver, which is to innovate profitably. I find that very interesting because when I saw that in some of you guys' materials, I was like, wait, I've never thought about innovation needing to be profitable, but it absolutely does, because you could innovate anything in the world. Does it produce profit for your business? So give me just like a practical example, again, CloudZero, of you guys, maybe there was an innovation you guys wanted to do, and I don't know, maybe it wasn't profitable, or was it, give me something like that, and then what you guys did with it.
Yeah, we had a thesis early on that timeliness of specific data was really important. I'm going to keep this a little vague, but we were ingesting a stream of data really regularly. And it turned out that data was really expensive, but it was okay because we thought this was incredibly valuable to our customers. And sure enough, it was the type of data our customers cared about deeply. And all of a sudden we woke up one day and that was a serious portion of our cloud COGS, a serious percentage of what it costs for us to deliver the platform. And what we did was we started looking at that unit costs and we started breaking it down different ways. We said, okay, well, maybe we should charge a little more. Maybe it's a packaging pricing thing. Maybe it's something else. What we very quickly found was that the cost for every time we were processing that data was very reasonable. And you talk to customers, they go, absolutely, we'll absolutely pay a multiple of that. If you spend $1 on it, we'll give you a little over $1 because that's more expensive for us to do. What wasn't as valuable was us doing it 6 times a day, because maybe they were only looking at that data once or twice a day. And at a high level, it looked like we had this giant problem, like, oh my gosh, we're spending X and we can barely make X back. But then when we looked at it and said, okay, well, actually, we're spending a lot less than X for every time we do this, and customers want to spend more than that one-time fee, it became very obvious that we had really an architecture issue. It wasn't just a unit cost issue, it was more how we thought about value. And that visibility into what our system was costing us on a unit level instead of just an aggregate infrastructure level allowed us to have those conversations, allowed us to talk to our users, and very quickly came up with a way that we could align those two things and have both sides really happy.
So in that particular case, did that end up being like an upsell to your customers or like an additional thing that they began to pay for, or were they already paying for it? You just were more profitable under the new plan?
Absolutely. So the first thing we did was we saw that many customers weren't even requesting to have it that often. And so we just scaled that back, and we saved something like $1 million in annualized cloud spend. So immediately it was essentially waste, but it wasn't waste like the industry thinks about. The industry often thinks about waste as, hey, you have a resource over here, you're only using it 40%, or you have something that's not running. We were keeping our code very busy. This was nothing that a traditional cloud cost platform could have found, because it looked like everything was very busy. It was only by diving into, hey, you're doing that 6 times a day. Is every single one of those providing value? And when we looked, we said, our users aren't using 5 of those. Why don't we not do that processing? And it was very easy there. And then you're absolutely right. There's a subset of customers who might be interested in doing it more. And then we can have a discussion about, oh, well, what is that worth to you? And is there something that is economical to both sides to make sense there?
That's really incredible, because essentially you've taken something that is perceived really as a cost only, because you're able to evaluate and unitize it. I don't think that's the right word, but basically put it into pieces. You now turn it into business information that your business then uses to make really smart business decisions. I mean, saving $1 million annualized is literally like making $1 million more profit.
Absolutely. And that's the really important lesson I've learned doing this. I can't go to my CEO and complain about AWS S3 costs or GCP GKE costs, right? They're going to say, I don't know, Bill, do your job. Like, you figure out the bill. But I can go to my CEO and say, hey, this feature that we sell over here only has, a gross margin of 55%. This feature over here has a 93% gross margin. Why aren't we leaning more into that and selling that, because that's way more valuable? Or should we be spending time increasing the margin on the other one? That is a conversation you can have with the entire leadership team and as a company. And without actually marrying in that data, that unit cost visibility, and that business context, you can't have the strategic conversations to make better decisions for the whole business.
You shared a number a minute ago, and I really liked that because it gave us something to hang our hats on.
Yeah.
Do you have any other stats or numbers that you're willing to kind of go out there and share about what you guys have saved, or like how you've gotten more efficient with things?
Yeah, absolutely. So the $1 million one is always fun because that's a nice round number. But there are 2 other recent projects that come to mind. One was around, we had a lot of shared resources. This is incredibly common in a multi-tenant SaaS world. In some ways, it's best practice. If you want a really efficient architecture, you want different customers and different features and different functions reusing infrastructure. You don't have to have tons of infrastructure just sitting around. The problem there is you start losing some of your visibility. So we had some database warehouses that were doing SQL loads, and one of our engineers used our platform to tease out what are all the different queries costing there. And what they found was that the most expensive queries were actually around that anomaly subsystem I talked to you about earlier. I'm sure no surprise to many people, when you're doing AI and machine learning, those things get expensive really fast. And so they looked at that, and what they noticed was that there was a way to pre-compute some of the data they needed. And so by getting that visibility into the right person's hands, they had this light bulb moment, and they went off, and a week later we had this thing that we called custom base tables, and it saved us about $250,000 a year. So a single engineer with that visibility, this is why we love engineers, right? They see a problem, they want to solve it. By giving them that visibility, they came up with a really cool solution. About a staff week of work, all of a sudden we had a $250,000 reduction in our cloud cost bill. Another one we saw very similarly, again, getting to this idea of peeking into shared resources, was we looked at the data layer that powers our live web app. As you can imagine, we have hundreds and thousands of people every day coming to our web app to look at their company's expenses and try to understand where they can find savings. We were looking at that, and what they noticed was that different users had different, say, sizes of requests. Some came in and they wanted to just see a little bit of data, or they were at a company that was small. Others came in, they were one of the largest SaaS companies in the world, and they were asking for a year of data at this very high cardinality. And we were routing them all to the same infrastructure, and that was somewhat inefficient, right? We had to size that right so the large requests could work, and that was sometimes a lot of overhead. And so what they did was they created a little bit of machine learning right there that would take a look at the query and guess, does it need, a Goldilocks zone? Does it need the very small one, the medium one, or the big Papa Bear one? And by doing that, our costs got dropped by about $150,000 a year. And again, this is a single engineer with the visibility is looking at that, and they get that light bulb moment. And those engineering-led savings are the ones that are so exciting to us, because without that visibility, your engineers will never be able to solve some of those problems. But when you start adding those up, if your engineers are delivering 6 or 7-figure savings every month or two, all of a sudden cost becomes much less of a concern.
That's amazing. So it's fascinating to me because I've always pictured the engineering, sort of the MO of how an engineer goes about their work is about, we're delivering a product, we're making a customer happy, or we're doing something there that is delivering innovation, like we talked about. But you've got this other component that, honestly, I mean, obviously I'm not an engineer, but it seems to me like cost would be the thing that's sort of buried far in the back of their mind, because I mean, that's somebody else's problem, right? What you guys have done is you've put that like into the workflow, if you will, of what needs to be considered as we're doing this. At CloudZero, walk me through, like, how do you guys go about sort of, how do you rank this stuff? In other words, where does the cost come into the pile of other priorities that an engineer addresses?
Yeah, it's a great question. We have a first principle of decentralizing most of the day-to-day decisions. We believe in small autonomous teams that understand their mission and then make a lot of the decisions on what they should be working on to deliver on that mission. So what that means is the teams are generally long-lived and they own areas of the product and they own delivering new innovation in there. And then we give them this insight into cost. And so a lot of this, not always, if we're having an issue with the unit economics of an area, perhaps we'll ask a team to focus more, happens somewhat naturally. We're big believers that engineers, like most people at most jobs, want to take pride in what they're doing. They want work that they can both be proud of, but they can also demonstrably see connected to the business. And so that's why it's a great thing when you can show someone cost, and if you can connect it to the business, then all of a sudden they can see that, oh, if I do a little work here and I find 3 days to improve this or 2 days to improve that, it's going to make a tangible impact on the business that I work for. They can be proud of that, and then they can talk about it. And all of a sudden, it's a story that they can talk about outside of their group. It's really hard to go talk to the rest of your group about how you refactored, a function to be more supportable. Sure, the salesperson is going to kind of nod along and go, that sounds great. But if you can go to the rest of the company and talk about how your team worked for a week and all of a sudden changed the unit economics so the company makes 1% more money every time they sell it, that's something everyone in the company can understand and get behind. And that really creates a virtuous cycle where that engineer or that team of engineers get really excited to work on that again and find other wins like that.
That's really good. Just a couple more questions, and then you finally get to take a breather today. So you mentioned a couple of examples a moment ago about the savings, and you actually included in your answer what I'm about to ask, but I'm just going to ask again just to kind of clarify. So can you give me an example, or can you just explain to us how, using your platform, you discovered where to get some savings? So whether it was in these large SQL or SQL queries, or if it's in changing out data layer pieces, the size of them, or whatever. How have you modified future processes or future procedures to essentially, in the long run, become more cost efficient?
Absolutely. Assuming there you're talking about kind of our internal process of developing and innovating
Yes.
to make sure with an eye towards innovation. One thing that we've learned, and actually sadly took us a little while to get here, seems obvious in retrospect, was that some of the same tools you use to figure out product market fit for a feature can work for cost. In that, very few people in a SaaS world would just roll a feature out to everyone, just immediately release it to everyone. It's not, some people do that, but best practice is to kind of put it into production and roll it out, test it, get some feedback from this user, do a beta, use a feature flag. And we're finding that when you follow that, you can track costs just as well. So it's very common now for teams to roll out features slowly, to do all the things you'd want to do when it comes to talking to users to make sure it actually gets the outcome you want, to watching your scalability and your backend logs. We can also look at costs during all of that and say, okay, well, what are we seeing for cost? And are there any issues there? Is there anything unexpected there? Generally, we have a rough idea of what you'd want the cost to come in for, especially if it's something that is in addition to the existing feature that you're already packaging and pricing. And that all of a sudden gives this team a great way to pull on the brakes if they see any issues so that we don't have problems. And really, that's where you're going to save the most money, is when you can stop having problems versus having a mean time to resolution for your problems be much lower. And so that's probably the biggest change in our process, is making sure every team is equipped and knowledgeable so that when they're rolling out a feature, they can look at the cost and make decisions right then and there of, is that in line with what they want, or are there any changes we want before we finish rolling it out to all of our customers?
Excellent. I appreciate how prepared you have been for this discussion, by the way. I love it. Are there any things that you have thought through or wanted to share that I haven't set up for you to share? If so, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, I think the biggest question we often hear from other engineering leaders is, this sounds really hard. How are we going to do it? And what I wanted to say was the huge culture change, what I'm talking about of, rolling out features slowly and having routines, sure, that might take a while, but this process can return investment right away. If you haven't started down a cloud cost management, start doing it. The small things add up and it becomes a virtuous cycle. Start making sure your teams have visibility. Start making sure that they have that backstop and ability to get notified and do anomalies. Make sure you have the ability to break down shared costs. And even doing the first 20% will give such great returns to both your company and your engineering culture that it'll be worth that investment. And before you know it, you'll be at a place where I'm talking about, where every engineer is coming up with new ideas and really pushing that forward.
That's awesome. I like that. Cool. Thanks, Bill. Go enjoy a break. Don't talk to people for a while.
No promises, but this was a lot of fun, Lance. Hope we get to do another one in the future.